I think part of the issue with the way that people approach health and fitness currently is that everything is so quantifiable. There's this constant urge to just quantify and record in reps and sets. And I think past a certain point, that does the individual a disservice because it removes so much further from the human component. And I also think that when you get in the highest levels of play and like improvisation, there is no quantifying, right? You can't quantify how good a kickboxer is. I mean, I guess by his record, but I mean, there are certain skills and abilities that you really can't. Like if you look at like Floyd Mayweather's defense, you can't quantify that.
Stay tuned, stay curious. Enculturation Podcast. Ryan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you taking the drive and taking the flight from Vegas, right?
Vegas, yeah, indeed.
All the way to the Bay Area to share a little bit more about your background and your path into the movement and physical heart.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so tell me a little about your background and how did you end up where you are now?
Sure, yeah. So I, growing up as a kid, a lot of my focus was in martial arts actually. So I did martial arts for about a decade, traditional martial arts. And then in high school, I continued martial arts, but then I also was in track and field. And we had a state qualifying 4x4 team, and that was kind of a lot of my focus at the time. And then once high school ended and I wound up not running in college, I pursued martial arts a little more. And then when I felt that kind of hit an end, I picked up dance. I wanted something that was as creatively engaging, but not as, I guess you could say, as much on the warrior side of the mentality. I wanted something that would kind of give me a bit of a break from that. I felt I was kind of burnt out. And I think that the way that I was applying some of it to my life was becoming a hindrance and not a benefit.
Yeah, so you mentioned traditional martial arts. Can you elaborate what that means?
Sure, yeah. So I did Wing Chun Kung Fu, which is a little more popularized today. It wasn't as popular 10 or so years ago, but Wing Chun Kung Fu, Aikido, Taekwondo, Tai Chi Chuan, Baguazhang, Xing Yi Chuan. Oh yeah, no, so those are the big ones.
How did you get into so many martial arts? That's a lot.
This sounds silly, but I was like obsessed with Mortal Kombat as a kid, and that was like it. And I just, and I just always had like a kin to it and wanting to learn more about fighting. And then, I grew up in kind of a more physical neighborhood, and so between all those factors, yeah.
Yeah, I totally get the unorthodox sources of inspiration. There's the obvious ones like Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, all that stuff, right? But I at one point I was watching the Power Rangers, and I got remember Tommy the Green Ranger?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I got his karate video, right? And he was on VHS.
No, I didn't know he did one of those.
Yeah, he had some training material on the VHS, and that's that wasn't my only source into martial arts, if you even consider that. But like as far as like the
Mortal Kombat parallel?
Yeah.
And when I got into martial arts, I was obviously a huge Bruce Lee fan, no doubt. When I got really into Baguazhang, there were certain founders of certain branches of styles I was really into. I would say those are probably some of my main inspiration martial arts wise. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some commonalities, since you've done so many different arts, that is there like a unifying concept or truth between those arts?
Well, I think between all of them, probably with the exclusion of Taekwondo, and I mean you could include Taekwondo too, but a lot of them were Chinese martial arts, and there was a heavy focus on internal development as well as external. So there was a large meditative component. When I did Taekwondo, there wasn't a lot of meditative component. Even in Wing Chun Kung Fu, I felt there was a fair amount of meditative component, and for sure with Tai Chi, Bagua, Xing Yi, no doubt. Yeah. So that's what I would say is the big overlap.
Yeah. Would you say that background has heavily shaped your understanding of the human body compared to, let's say, if you had never done it and you just had physical education in school or something?
Yeah, for sure. I think because in those arts, you have to surrender your body to a certain principle for such a prolonged period of time that requires a certain amount of faith that I think that you can't just like digest on the internet. The one thing that I remember when I was 19 and I was practicing internal martial arts would qualify as like Tai Chi, Bagua, Xing Yi. Those would be qualified as internal martial arts, whereas your external would be like karate. And I remember I had allergies for the longest time. And then after like a 2-year stint of meditation, never had allergies.
Really?
Again. Yeah, never again.
Was it a certain type of meditation?
It was a lot of, I guess, the easiest way to be explained, it was breathing into certain body parts as a way of flowing chi into certain body parts or focusing intent on certain body parts. Yeah. And when it got into organ specific is when I started to see the diminishment of allergies.
Yeah, that's amazing. can't say I'm an expert on it, but I've seen either as more research or just popular authority figures leaning into that our body like is a physical manifestation of what we feel or what we attribute to, So it could be like burden you might feel on your shoulders or something, or something else on your stomach,
Yeah.
I used to be with a partner that whenever she would feel really upset, she would really vomit like every single time.
Yeah.
Because she literally couldn't stomach her stress.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Carl Jung, a famous Swiss psychologist, believed in that we engage in a lot of symbolic acts as a way of coping with our external environment. So like he would equate like bulimia, and the purging of bulimia is the equivalent of trying to purge something from yourself, not just the food itself. So yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels with that.
Interesting. Yeah. So we definitely got a lot to talk about. So I'm curious about this leap into dance, because you felt like you were tapped out or have felt pretty comfortable exploring the warrior side of things and maybe want to be more artistic.
I think, I mean, when I became much more proficient in martial arts to the point where it was becoming more recognized, the abridged version of the story is that I was helping my father, my father's always been an addict, and I helped my father at the time kind of recover from point A to point B. But then watching him relapse again just burnt me out. And I think I had put so much faith in like the warrior component, like just keep pushing on, that it made me blind to certain realities of what couldn't be fixed and where there were certain limitations. And I've always wanted to dance. I picked it. I always messed around with it in high school. But that was kind of the final push that moved me over. Yeah.
How did you land on hip hop?
I guess just always the type of music that I've listened to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there any exposure to certain dancers within your environment, or? I
mean, in high school, no. I mean, in high school, it's whoever was around. I remember when I started taking it seriously in 2011 out in Las Vegas, there's a place called Tuesday Blend, and it's the first Tuesday of every month. They still do it, but it's morphed a lot into something different now. At the time, it was more of like an underground cypher. Everybody just kind of got together, get down. They'd have performances, but it was much more dancer based, and I would say that was a big step for me too, meeting a lot of people in the scene.
So if your theme was the warrior perspective for your martial arts, what would the theme be for your dance chapter?
I think the priority with dance would be kind of, I guess you could say, the balance between the warrior and the soft side, and maintaining a constant center. Like when I practiced internal martial arts, I always felt there were components of it that were too soft. And I think that when I practiced external martial arts, there was components of it that were too hard. And I think with Eximo, the aim for sure is to always stay kind of down the middle. Obviously, depending on what the practice is at the time, you're kind of going to veer left or veer right, so to speak. But with individuality always being at the forefront, I think it's easier to stay in between those two polarities of hard and soft, if that answers the question.
So would you say that dance, or what would you say about dance and its impact on expanding or filling in the knowledge or views you have on the body and physical health?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from dance, and I stand on this heavy today in the way that I teach, I think the best way that people retain new movement patterns is through rhythm. So I feel that rhythm is the best way to imbue kind of new programming into the body. And that was really the biggest takeaway from dance. Because I think in other ways, and the other ways I've watched people retain information, it's fair, but it's not to the same capacity. And I also think that when you use rhythm to imbue it, I also feel that it's easier to apply on an improvisation end. I think when you take the rhythm component, it's easier to isolate and it's easier to integrate. But when you come to the improvised side, I think it becomes harder. So that I would say is the biggest thing, is learning things rhythmically.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because pretty much everything in life revolves around rhythm, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The circles of the earth around the sun and the universe, our heartbeat, and the way we walk. So it only makes sense to have it be applied, I guess, in the real world sense, versus just like something that's more aesthetically but not usable.
Yeah, and I think it's just a great principle overall to kind of surrender yourself to. So yeah.
Okay, so thanks for that. And how did all this translate into the creation of Eximo?
Yeah, so Eximo started because I was battling a lot at the time, and I was born in New York, and I've lived in Las Vegas for an extended period of time. And when I was getting very proficient in battling, I was like, oh, I'll move back to New York as going to the source. And then when I moved back to New York, they're like, well, you're not really doing hip hop, like you're fusing styles. Because out west, that's really all we do, especially in Vegas. It's heavily fusion based. And that kind of opened my eyes to not just only what I was doing, but what I wanted for myself. And so then my practice in general became more movement based, if you will. And then from then, I've always had an akin to teaching. And then I think in my own practice, the parallels and the principles that I kind of drew out and just in realizing what I needed was easier for me to then extrapolate and then eventually teach.
Yeah. So what are some of those things that you extrapolated? What are those core principles? Or if someone were to have like one defining understanding of Eximo, what would that be,
Well, yeah, I mean, the defining principle for Eximo is typically when you learn a style right, it's style first and the individual second as a way of paying homage to that style and the culture, right? With Eximo, the focus is to put the individual first as a way of approaching your practice. Similar to like Bruce Lee with Jeet Kune Do, or if you've heard Carl Jung talk about the dilemma between the individual and society and how it's this constant pendulum back and forth. I feel that there's a lot that goes on in terms of people learning a style and paying homage to a style, but there's nothing really shaped around the approach towards individuality. I mean, people embark on it regardless just because it makes it self-evident, but I don't think there's anything specific. And so to give you kind of examples, each semester when I teach at these places, I'll come up with different principles that I'll introduce to the students. So maybe one will be like fluidity as a building block for speed, strength or structure as a building block for power, the culmination and the dissipation of energy, and so forth.
Yeah, and what does Eximo mean to you in order for you to be motivated to like share it with so many people? Like why have the urge to share it versus just keep it to yourself,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, Eximo means release in Latin. Just put that out there. Okay. Yeah. So that's actually, that's where I got I was studying release techniques from contemporary, and I was inspired by the fact that contemporary had a series of protocols just dedicated towards something aside from itself. And so eventually when I kind of worked towards my own art, I was looking up just terms, and I looked up release in Latin. So that's how I came to the term itself. In terms of why share it, I think it just makes it self-evident. I think sometimes if you've ever seen yourself at a party, right, and maybe you're the center of that social circle at the time because you have a certain knowledge in something. I just always found myself at the center of kind of like movement talks. It just not even forcing it. And so then eventually I shaped teachings around it and then do what I do now.
Yeah. And so how has been your teaching experience?
I'm learning. I feel I learn more than the students do.
Yeah.
I think it depends on, first and foremost, how long you're with the students. I think the standard format of just like teaching a workshop, I think is great, but I also don't think it's nearly enough of what I would personally want. So, and again, partially selfishly, because then I continually learn, because the more I'm able to put my teachings out there, especially on a certain student body, if you will, I can see not just where this teachings are successful, but where the shortcomings are in the teachings. So, but very, very rewarding. I mean, it's something that I constantly work towards today. I'm working towards teaching it full-time in a university. So that's kind of where my focus is currently.
Yeah, I see that you've taught over 28 states. And
29 now.
So 29 now. Congrats. Yeah, what was the 29th?
The 29th was, I should know this. I feel like it's either Boston or West Virginia. It was either Massachusetts or West Virginia. I don't know which one to be specific, though. I'd have to look. I think it was West Virginia.
Yeah, I don't know anything about West Virginia, so it would lead me to believe it's probably West Virginia.
Yeah.
Just because of I literally never hear anything out of West Virginia, so it would make sense that it's 29th one versus Boston or Massachusetts.
Well, some of them are hard to get into. I mean, I'm surprised at this point that I've hit 29. Because certain markets, I don't think you wouldn't think are as rich for dance. But what I'll often see is in smaller cities, there will be one studio that kind of runs the whole city. And if you get in with that studio. And so it was the same weekend I taught at a university in Virginia. So it worked out because they were just right next door.
Okay. So let's say I'm a prospective student, right?
Okay.
And it's not a one-on-one class, meaning it's not a private session, right?
Okay.
And then there's 20, 30 other students. How did you structure the class or curriculum around so many different individuals and their individual needs?
Yeah, good question. I think some of that was just flat out trial and error. everything that I already come up with is pretty scalable. I try not to do anything that is would take too much time to acquire the skill. Certain skills I think take a certain amount of time to acquire, and you're not going to get it in a certain session, versus certain skills. People are like, oh, like I have the coordination and the flexibility and the strength to do it, but I've never done it before. And I think that's kind of the mantra for how I've shaped the exercises. I would just say that. I mean, I just try to make it scalable and moldable and fittable to the success of the students.
Tell me something about your teaching experience, as far as like any particular defining moments in your teaching career. Was it you saw someone's mind get reshaped, or was there any kind of pushback against what you teach, because possibly it could go against, I guess, popular Western approaches?
Yeah. I mean, what was the first part of the question? Defining moments?
Yeah.
I remember teaching at Las Vegas Academy, which is a high-end performing arts school, it's like a top 10 performing arts school, and it's in Las Vegas. That was pretty defining for me, because it really not only just gave me the faith that I belong in that environment, but then I saw my teachings did have application and a place in higher education. And eventually I did universities, and that was another, when I taught at Alvin Ailey, I think that was another moment for me where I was like, oh, like my teachings, have a place here. So those I think would be very beneficial moments, because you see the scope of your teachings expand. In that same token, and in terms of pushback, for sure. I just think because it's so different, not everyone wants to take a chance on it. And I think sometimes it takes a little more coercion, if you will. But I don't think it's like ill-intended. I don't think it's because people don't see merit in it. I just think that because, as I said, I just think it's so outside the box. I mean, it's not what people are currently practicing at all. And even how people approach their practice, I don't see it as that. So I just think it's a big leap from point A to point B. And because of that.
Yeah. So I remember reading something, funny enough, I think it was from a Virginia-based school a while ago, about, I think it was a high school that put out this newsletter or some type of documentation that said, don't do back bends, or I forget what the exact word is in yoga, right?
Okay.
Because it's bad for your spine.
The wheel, I think, in yoga.
Yeah. Someone correct me, so feel free to fact check me. But in any case, because they were advising that, this is not good for your back, as like an absolute statement,
Yeah.
Which could be true if there was a high volume of people that couldn't do it. But to me, anytime there's a large population of people that can do something with a high success rate, that means it's not genetics or luck in
for
the
sure.
ability to do
I
it.
totally
that
agree.
means there's a process in which you do it, Yeah, and so that to me is an example of when a certain practice is challenged by maybe a limited Western thing. I don't know how else to put it other than that,
Yeah, I think now you're seeing a lot of that, right? I think at one point it was like, don't squat past your knees, and your knees have to be in certain relation to your feet and your hip. And in terms of back bends, in terms of how people do everything, I think before it was very boxed in as like, this is kind of the standard and how to approach. And I think the problem is that, in life, our bodies are never in those exact positions.
Correct.
Right? So it's like people train to like deadlift 400 pounds, but I've never seen anyone pick anything above the ground like that. So it doesn't there's obviously some translation, but there's also a component where it doesn't translate. And so that's why I think it's good that what you're talking about, that there's been an uprising, if you will, of functional movement and things of that nature that kind of challenge that.
Yeah. Do you have different curriculums based on either the demographic or the needs of the students? Let's say an elderly population versus young kids or something,
For sure, yeah. I mean, I haven't done anything like that in a while. I mean, right now the demographic is very similar. It's pretty much, when I do private studios, it's pretty much kids 11 to 18, and then I do universities, which is kids 18 to 22. The movement capacity for all those kids is relatively similar, and so I don't have to shape too much. I think on the younger end, they're a little less moldable. I shouldn't say less moldable. On the younger end, they haven't figured out how they're going to problem solve, but they also haven't had movement patterns that they've programmed into their body. Whereas the older kids, they have patterns already programmed into their body, which kind of can become a hindrance. But the benefit is that they're used to problem solving. So I think those are the two biggest things I've taken into account. But I have taught older people before, and I just had to scale everything way back. In short, yeah, I didn't do anything that was overly strenuous or kind of like bouncy or plyometric on the joints. I don't think I would veer too much from taking joints in unconventional vectors, if you will. But I don't really do much of that anymore.
Okay, good to know. I think we had some videos of some of your work that I want to pull up.
So sure.
We can talk about it.
Yeah.
So let me pull that up and then I'll let you
Awesome.
know. Yeah, so guide me into what's happening here, or what are we looking at?
Yeah, so in this particular workshop and at this specific time, I would devise my workshops into two major components. So in the first half of the video, you see a series of bridges being done.
Okay.
And so the premise for those specific is dealing with unconventional axes of balance. So typically when people move through space and time, it's up, down, left, right. Mm-hmm. And I would take the up, down, left, right axis and I would just turn it like this. And so, right, because people don't typically explore diagonal.
Yeah, let me play that again.
Sure.
And tell me when to pause it.
Yeah. It's just the first part of the video. Yeah, no problem at all.
Okay, maybe you can pause it.
Yeah. Yeah, so you'll see here a lot of it is diagonal and training to even reach diagonal and cram space that way. And then we'll pause that there. So if you see back in a lot of these, right, like if you see that kick is diagonal rather than over.
Okay.
If you look at the way that she feeds her feet through underneath, you feed your feet in a certain placement. So this way your hips go from flat to top, but exploring a diagonal axis. Obviously in the initial demo, diagonal. Because within the way people move through space and time, it's just really in these safe axes. And then if you look at martial arts, let's say like Judo, the way Judo off balances people is by taking this axis and turning it like this. Those are all your means of uprooting somebody. And so because your body is alarmed to move in those directions, I think that people don't typically explore them in individual practice, but all your high-level movers, and especially all your high-level dancers, those guys do explore that. And then I just needed an apparatus and a tool to introduce that, and I chose back bends and bridges as a means of introducing that for this specific one.
Yeah, it makes sense to me because I feel like pretty much every movement in life or the real world is not in a linear pathway, right?
Yeah.
And to train in a linear manner and then expect to excel that in the 3D world doesn't make sense.
Yeah. When I see a lot with freestyles and battles, I think that guys that are trying to get from, I guess you could say from point A to point B, from like beginner to intermediate, even you could say from intermediate to an advanced, I would say that's the biggest thing. And circling back to your question earlier about demographics and what I choose to teach within certain demographics, many, many years ago at LVA, I realized there was a very positive response towards kids and back bends and bridges. Like they just love the whole back reality and going backwards. And so that's why I chose it as one of the tools, because it's so physical and and foreign to some of the kids, it's very, very engaging to them. And all of them are able to do a bridge. So it's just a matter of them learning how to maneuver it. And so that's the first part. Yeah. So for the second component, before I play it, I'll say, what it deals with is I'd create a 3-part movement pattern with your feet in different relation to your body. So outside of your center of mass, in line with your center of mass, and across your center of mass. And I'd give the students 3 different pieces, each embodying one of those, and then string those pieces together in a complete pattern. And so, right, that would be a cross center of mass. And this is kind of just going over the across center of mass. There, and then you'll see outside, across, and then which are the last ones in line, and then they pop up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that explanation. I do appreciate that you are, in my opinion, allowing kids to maintain that level of mobility into adult life. Because I think what happens is like, as kids, you can see any kid fall down and it's fine. Mm-hmm. Like there's no crying, there's no pain. It's just like, oh, okay, this is just life. We go on, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then at some point we all sit in chairs 90 degrees, and then we lose the ability to kind of explore with our bodies.
For sure. Yeah.
Cool. So I think this is the next video right here, right?
That's the same one. We could watch a different one. So I'll pause it there. So this specific workshop has two components. The first component, or I should say the second component in the workshop, was what I addressed in the last video, is back bends and diagonal axes of balance. The other component that you see here, right, the different leg patterns, is basically maintaining the same intent through three different positions that would typically conflict with their intent. So if your body is in air, or if it's low on the floor, or if it's in the middle, right? Typically there's a different approach to all three, right? That's why you have people who excel lower at floor work and people who don't excel at acrobatics and vice versa, because they're very different mentalities. So I would introduce a 3-part pattern: high, low, and middle. But the idea would be to maintain a consistent level of fluidity, therefore mirroring, and that there's a certain level of intent that remains congruent through the whole pattern. So yeah, that's what I've been teaching. That was the most recent syllabus.
Yeah. So I have to ask. So I'm a dancer. So seeing stuff like this doesn't necessarily, it makes sense to me, but also it doesn't ward me off, right? But if I wasn't a dancer, if I was just, I guess, a non-physically practiced person, and I saw this, the first thing that would come to mind is injuries, right? So how do you deal with injuries as far as like making sure your students don't get it, or I guess approach just the limit right before injury, given their background? For
sure, yeah. Well, I think everything is definitely, by the time people see these clips in these workshops, we've spent a significant amount of time getting from point A to point B.
Okay, gotcha. So this isn't day one.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not day one, and it's also not like I demo a pattern and the kids just do it, right? So typically, to speak to the approach, if you have a 3-part pattern, I would teach, move 1 and then move 2 and then move 3, and then we would integrate them. And sometimes even, let's say, between 2 and 3, if there was difficulty with the transition, we would just work on the transition, and then we would wind up putting them all together. And then in regards to, I don't think I've had anyone get injured in any of my classes, but I do think it's very important in some regards to almost like ride the line of where trauma would or wouldn't be. Because I think if you're right there with students and you ride that line and they wind up being successful, it gains a lot of trust. Versus obviously the opposite, if they get injured, they don't trust you, and then everything kind of goes to crap. So yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of the concept, I think it's called eustress or de-stress, where there's a certain level of stress that's good for you that you can recover from versus,
interesting.
Versus just jumping off a building and you're like, your leg is just broken.
Okay. It's evident in the name, but I haven't heard of that.
Yeah. So let's go to the next video.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's happening here?
So for this specific class at the time, it was in regards to the culmination and the dissipation of energy. So what would happen is I would teach a certain move that would gather energy, and then I would teach subsequent moves that would either flatten that energy out or pop that energy up. So in this specific example, right, the hook sweep that you see is what gathers energy, right? And then the single leg plyo here is the culmination of energy and popping the energy up. And then in the second part of the class, what I'm really talking about, and to kind of answer your question about injuries and whatnot, in the second half of the clip, I'm addressing the plyometric component. And so what I'll have people do is I'll have them put their feet together and do like a double leg plyo, and then I'll just have them simply scale the other leg back. Right. And then you'll see there's a lot of emphasis on triangulation of your knee, your foot, and your foot over a center line as a means of evenly distributing your mass as a way of pushing yourself off the ground. And so this was kind of a more, the first 2 clips were just more like highlights, if you will. This is a more of an example of something a little more dissected. And this is where we spend a lot of time and things like this.
So in this position right here, essentially your left foot, left knee, and right leg is a tripod, and your body is centered over the balance point of the tripod. Yeah.
Well, and technically, actually, it was just because we're in the middle of this clip. That knee will be down too.
Okay.
It'll actually be all 4 points that are down.
Okay.
And I don't think if you can see just before I'm moving, it'll actually be all 4 points are down, and it'll be 2 points on one side of the center line, and the other 2 points on the other side of the center line, and your center of mass over the top.
So at this stage of the exercise, help me understand the tier or the progression, right? Like what,
For sure.
where does this start from? What place is this in that progression, and where does it end up? Like what's the
Are you how I approach it in a class?
how you prepare for this, right?
Yeah.
And then
So
where is this as far as like the challenge or difficulty, and then like does it evolve into something else further along? Kind of like
for sure,
walk me through the whole spectrum.
Yeah. So this will be, and I have a few moves like this, where like when you see, there we go. When you see the demo, I think people are kind of alarmed, and they're like, how am I going to get from point A to point B? And so in terms of the single leg plyometric, I'll have people just do a simple double leg plyometric on their knees, right? And then you just pop up, right? And I'll place a lot of emphasis on getting not so much getting high on the plyometric, but getting your feet underneath you, right? And then really all it is taking that double leg plyometric and then just shifting one leg back, eventually to where there's enough of a shift to where you're actually in a lunge position. And then sometimes what you'll see is when people shift the leg back, they'll wind up shifting it on the same side as the other, right? So they'll have difficulty popping up, which is what I kind of talk about in the first component, is how if you see my knee over here, people will put, after they shift it back, they'll put it on both sides. And so that'll have an issue. Sometimes they'll put it too far on the other side. That'll cause an issue. But with moves like these, there's actually a pretty high success rate by the end of the class. I would probably say at least 80% of the kids are able to get it, and the ones that can't will just stay with a double leg plyometric. Okay. And then that's just kind of and then that'll kind of conclude that specific exercise.
So there's a place for all the students at their level in the progression of this step, whether it's like double plyo or the single leg plyo or the spin single leg plyo. Right?
The hardest thing is, I think, when you get into bridges and back bends, because every now and then it'll be too tough. But even then, I think it actually, and I often end the class with bridges and back bends. And because what I've realized is when I leave enough with a challenge, and even if there's not a super high success and finish rate, a lot of those people are very intrigued, and I'll see them after class practicing some more, like trying to get it. So I also think, whereas you have certain exercises where there's like a really high success rate and it builds a sense of community, I also think it's good to have certain exercises where it's like maybe half of you'll get it and half of you won't. But enough of where it's challenging to like, hey, I'm going to go home and work on that.
Yeah, my personal mantra for a good class is not that you can do the whole class, but you can walk away with something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like there's been lots of classes where maybe I could do the whole class, but I didn't necessarily walk away with anything, Mm-hmm. And there's been other classes where I couldn't do 90% of the class because the teachers was just intentionally very difficult,
Yeah.
But where I did get has changed me for life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I also think if you're really aiming to shape long-term teachings, I think that when you have something that you teach where everybody gets it relatively early on, I think it's hard to build a syllabus off that, because then it seems like every lesson plan just really ends early. And if the idea is for everything to kind of snowball into the next, like, hey, we learned this at this time, I think it's good to have somewhat of a lack of success rate in certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there more to the second half of the video?
It's just students demoing.
And then, so you're also teaching on rhythm too, because music's playing.
I just really use the music in the background. I don't hold them to the standard of doing it. Yeah. It's more about the illusion of it being difficult than it actually is. Oh, and this is what you had asked. See how it comes double leg?
Yeah.
That's the regression.
Okay.
Before we split the legs. And that's kind of where you'll start.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. No, it was a fun syllabus that I taught.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. No, thanks for showing it.
What are your thoughts on the current state of physical health for the average American? I know it's hard to define, but let me say that the average American is, I don't know what the official definition is, but the one that I would like you to answer to is the person that's not in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that's not in like a high-level physical art form,
Mm-hmm.
That's just maybe going through school, and their perspective on health is, let me run a mile if I want to do cardio, if I want to lose weight, let me touch my toes if you want to be flexible, whatever is being taught in their PE class, essentially, right? Because my experience of PE in the school system is not So, okay, let me rephrase. Let's take math, for example, right?
Okay.
First grade math to 12th grade math or college level math, worlds apart.
Oh yeah, for
like,
sure.
Like this
Yeah.
it's like from one dimension to like 12 dimensions, right?
Yeah.
Worlds apart, 1+1 or what is one to like theoretical physics and calculus, all this other stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Physical education from first grade to 12th grade is nearly identical. Like,
okay,
so the progression is very, very limited. It's more so I want to see you run an 8-minute mile, 7-minute mile, right? And then you'll get an A, and then or do 10 pull-ups, whatever, you get an A, and that's it, right?
Yeah. So was your question physical health or overall health, just to make sure?
Either, but I guess the physical side.
Yeah, I think that. I think there's, in terms of the current state of physical health overall, from what I've seen, there's definitely a higher level of awareness. I think there's a higher level of awareness as time goes on, regardless, because there's just a different there's all these different exposures to different movement practices and fitness programs and things of that nature. I also think there's a lot of, I'm not obviously a nutritionist or a dietitian, but just off food, I think that there's been a lot more exposure to just alternate ways of dieting and eating and having a healthy lifestyle. So I think those are all positive. I think what concerns me is kind of what you had said about from first grade to 12th grade math, is that there's all these like different universes. You have like the people who do like animal movement, and then you have the people who do like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and then you have people who are bodybuilders and power lifters. And I think that's just hard to assess because there's not a ton of overlap. So I guess just from like a bird's eye view, I think it just trends in a good direction. And I think that's really all you can ask for. I don't know if I could honestly say anything more than that. Then I just think it's in a better overall direction than it was. I mean, we're not in the bodybuilding era, so to speak, which I think is a good in a lot of ways, because a lot of those guys just killed their bodies. And I think that was a really rough way of doing things. And so where things are now with animal movements and functional practices and things of that nature, I think that is a lot more beneficial.
Yeah. Do you have any experiences with animal movement or some of these other popular figures in the movement culture, such as Ido Portal, for example?
I mean, for sure, I know who Ido Portal is. Absolutely. I think he was a big inspiration early on. Yeah, I think I followed a lot of his tenets and teachings very, very early on. And eventually, when I just moved towards creating my own stuff, I'd kind of branched away from that. But I think that's someone who, I can't think of anyone more who's probably impacted the movement culture the way he has, right? Because he put movement in a way that was separate from exercise and made it more of a function of just being a human being. He always would say human beings first and movers second. And I think that was a really enlightening way of looking at it, where typically people never really tied it to the human experience. They just always tied it to whatever fitness program you were embodying at the time. So I would say, if we're talking about influences, I would say he's definitely top.
Yeah, like how did he influence you? I ask because he's also been a big influence on me too. I've actually taken one of his workshops before.
Cool.
The corset workshop. Ironically enough, he wasn't there for the class, but his disciples, Johnny and I forgot who else, but I think Johnny was there.
Okay,
it's one of his like kind of core.
Yeah.
Right?
He has a core tribe.
Yeah. That workshop in LA was 2 days. It was very eye opening in the sense that the wide demographic that was there. So there was people like me, including one of my friends, Scotty. Shout out to Scotty. So we're dancers, right? And it makes sense to see other people like us. But there's also like circus performers.
Okay.
There was even physical therapists in his workshop as well.
I see that.
Yeah, and there was even what I could tell was the older, maybe affluent, retired folks. That was, hey, I'm 70. I don't want to be in bed the whole time. I want to learn how to move my body. And so that was very cool to see just a wide variety of skill sets and professions kind of unite under this movement thing. And I learned a lot of skill sets from there, to the point where it's still is something that I take with me, like even nowadays, right? Meaning how to strengthen my joints, like have a strong spine that can curve and all that stuff, for example.
Yeah. Well, corset is it's a series of like bulletproofing protocols almost, right?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
And that's what you guys, because I've never been to any of them. That's what, over 2 days, that's what you guys had gone over?
Yeah. So things from your knees to your ankles, especially your spine.
Okay.
Like in a mobility perspective, but also after the workshop, in my opinion, I don't really see a difference between rehab and strengthening anymore, because now I feel like they kind of did the same thing, just on different tiers of progression, right? But ultimately, it's the same trajectory. It's like going from one place to the next, both in geographic location, right?
Yeah.
But also in like your ability. Maybe you're really injured and you can barely move your shoulder, but this is all you can do. But you're still moving towards the next step.
Yeah. No, I love his work.
Yeah. So like, was there any particular things that you kind of took away from him?
I think a lot of the initial exposure and what really blew him up onto the scene wasn't any of those teachings. It was much more extreme practices.
Yeah, like the one-arm handstand.
Yeah, a lot of calisthenics. I remember something that's been very popularized now are dragon pistol squats. Have you seen those? Are you familiar with what those are?
Yeah, so I believe it's like the pistol squat where you come down and you like swings to the side.
Correct. You wrap your leg around the side. Yeah. He was the first person I saw that. So that was kind of just what drew me. And I think another big thing that drew me to what he did was he was heavy into capoeira. And capoeira has a solo component called floreo. And he was very proficient in that. And to watch him express himself that way, I thought was just super enlightening. And I would probably say and he has all these, in his early years, he has all these YouTube tutorials. I don't know if you know this. He has all these YouTube tutorials like geared towards that.
Yeah.
And
I've seen him since he was in his basement garage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that I would say was the biggest influence of his work for me.
Okay. So before we get into what you may think of the optimal health experiences, what are some practices or some modalities that you feel like it's damaging or it's even not advised to pursue? I have a huge bias, but I can't get into CrossFit for like, I really,
I can see that.
Not that there's no value there, but the way that I see it being played out, it's like, especially when I see these very questionable pull-ups, it just swings the body around and just snaps it. And then people are just like being crushed under the weight. And it seems like the whole point is like, with dance, or what I'm getting from Eximo is you kind of isolate and then you integrate and leading to improvisation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the goal isn't to do it more so you can do it more so you can do it more. Then it's kind of like bodybuilding, right?
Yeah,
but
for
CrossFit, it seems like it's that, but you do it to be faster, to be faster, to be faster, to be faster, and do more.
Yeah, I think, if we're talking about CrossFit, I think CrossFit is a net positive for actually overall.
Okay.
I think, and I only say that because of the exposure to all these different things that really people didn't have exposure to unless they were in highly specialized environments. Like I think Olympic weightlifting, they really blew up. And the only way you would ever really know Olympic weightlifting before, like no one was snatching or cleaning at 24-hour fitness before CrossFit.
Yeah.
So I think that part's really positive. I think the detriment, and I think the reason where a lot of people get injured is because the idea is, it's like if you can't perform a certain pattern, and then your idea is, well, I can't perform it, so I'm going to add weight to it. It's like that's a recipe for injury. And people just get injured all the time. And that's what a lot of it comes down to. And I don't find it to be as... it's just not as scalable in certain components. I think it's hard to do with certain demographics. Maybe now they have more generic and general, like friendlier versions, maybe to people who aren't as adept to having a fitness background. But what I initially saw early on, and even what I've seen within the last, decade, has been a lot of people do get injured. Yeah. What was the first part of the question, though? You were asking me about anything I was against?
Yeah.
Well, I think that obviously, knowing your limits is pretty basic. I think the other thing is to really have a proportionate understanding of exertion to rest. So you have certain movement cultures that basically operate, and they'll just operate at like 70% effort, but then they practice 6-7 days a week. And then you have certain movement cultures that'll do 100% effort, but then they only operate 2 times a week. And I don't think that's taken into account enough, because either way, I think you're going to get the same outcome in the end in terms of overall percentages. I think it also weighs heavily dependent upon the practice. I think something where you train 1 to 2 times a week is going to be beneficial to something like powerlifting. Whereas if you do something like BJJ, it's beneficial to go 70%, over 6-7 days a week because you get more rounds in that way. But that's the biggest thing I would say people should be cognizant of, because I don't think people are cognizant of that ratio. And what I see in a lot of training circles is people just go balls to the wall. People just go as crazy as they can. And they're like, oh, I'm just going to like run myself ragged and, max out all the time. And it's just terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah. Do you have any personal experience with this, or like how did you start becoming aware of the importance of this?
Yeah, I do always believe, and Ido talks about this, that pain is the greatest teacher, and that's very true. So I've had my own experiences with injury, and then just from what I've seen with students, I think that would be also the other thing that I've just watched, how people adapt over time and what is really a benefit, what is the best level of exposure when teaching.
What are your thoughts on like optimal health? Do you do any biohacking, or do you have kind of any goals that you try to maintain, especially given
goals or
states that you try to maintain, but also especially given, getting older and also being more time constrained, limited,
Yeah, the biohacking thing, I think has a lot of merit. It concerns me a little sometimes, because the issue I feel with biohacking is that people, not that some of the methods don't work, but the mentality behind a lot of them is that people are looking for a shortcut. And I think that's kind of a dangerous thing to teeter-totter, because I do think there are great things out there. Like something that's not really super popular, like is peptide therapy, for instance. It's a way of recovery.
What is that? I've never heard that before.
Peptide therapy, peptides that exist in your body basically perform certain functions. And peptide therapy is you inject those peptides in your body as a way of whatever those functions need to be.
Is it to recover from soreness or muscle tear, or what?
Typically it's injury.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's what really kind of boosted it on to the scene as much. Now I think they're probably overused because they probably have like they do have some growth hormone properties, and I think it's kind of overprescribed at this point.
Where I can see a lot of people taking advantage of that is rather than it becomes a once in a while enhancement or an option, it becomes like part of the flow. Like, let me go harder because now I can use this other thing to heal myself.
Yeah. And then one thing is that there's just no, another thing with biohacking is in terms of the nervous system, I just don't think there's there's nothing that beats sleep and rest. You could take peptides, or, you guys will do testosterone or whatever. Those were all, really muscle based and what they're going to improve in recovery. If your nervous system is because you've trained 2 hours a day for 7 days a week, the only way you're going to get that back is by resting. In terms of biohacking, nothing that I would really advocate in specific. I would just say, train proportionally. And then what was the second part of the question?
If you have any particular goals for optimal health that you try to maintain.
Yeah.
So one thing that I'm very aware of with an aging body, but also with limited time is, I want to do so many things, but at some point you got to sacrifice. You got to make, okay, this is what I don't want to give up. This is what I have to give up, right?
Okay.
And at some point there's like a trade-off. Like maybe I give up a certain physique or a certain mobility or a certain position or a certain skill set because I just don't have time to maintain all these things. So what is that optimal state for you?
Well, yeah. Well, I think one is, it's, we're almost like conned into thinking that all these states have like direct relation to each other. Like the people who are the best, let's say, at pull-ups aren't the people with the biggest biceps. And I think the people who are sometimes the most athletic aren't the most shredded. So like this whole like Superman notion that we're taught when we're younger, I think is extremely conflicting and just not beneficial. For me, that was like first to go, for sure, was just the aesthetics of it. Because I think outside of that, I just don't think it played any role. The way I practice now is I just constantly try to touch the source of my rhythms and my dance and my movement patterns. And the minute I almost like get to the point, and then I'll stop, just as a way of like constantly engaging, almost like the equivalent of having like a prayer stand in your house. So even if it's sometimes, at home and it's just 30 minutes just to get myself up to a certain point, and I'll be like, okay, that's good. But just to constantly have it be centered around that, for sure.
So you're talking about treating it as a lifestyle versus this job that you're going to maintain all the time.
Yeah, I think that's much simpler put. Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely view it just as a way of body being.
Yeah. Do you have any personal experiences with any biohacking methods that you tried, or even supplements or anything like more exotic?
I mean, I've done peptide therapy for sure, so I can
does it
say,
work? Like, what was your experience?
yeah, for sure it does. Yeah, I had a shoulder injury for a long time, and it was just an overuse. It wasn't like anything was torn. It was just tendonitis, and I could not get it to go away. And I had seen peptide therapy qualifies under regenerative medicine.
Okay.
And I had gone to a regenerative medicine clinic, and I've had people that have had injuries and it didn't work for them. For me, it worked. And I also think it depends on what peptide you take.
What are like some of the different ones? Because I don't know anything about peptides.
Yeah, your biggest two, if you look up, are BPC 157 and thymosin beta 4 or TB 500. If I'm correct, thymosin beta 4 comes from the thymus gland. BPC 157, I know roughly of the backstory. I think it was developed in like the 80s or the 70s, and it was actually used for gastric distress. But they realized it had a lot of angiogenesis properties and healing. And so then subsequently it was used in that.
Can it only be prescribed, or is there any natural sources that can be found in?
I don't know about natural sources. No.
Okay.
I would assume. I mean, because your body makes it, I'm assuming it could be in some natural sources, but I don't know about a potency to the level of the therapy itself.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
It's probably super concentrated.
Similar like growth hormone, like your body produces growth hormone, and I've never taken growth hormone, but I think it's obviously when people inject growth hormone, it's not even comparable. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the link between physical and mental health?
I think it's big. Yeah. I mean, I think that I even feel that I would say mental predates is the precursor to physical. Yeah, for sure. I almost feel like your function and your brain health and then your form kind of follows, so.
Would you say that the martial arts still plays an impact on your mental aspect? Because it seems like a lot of martial arts get really disciplined and strong in the mind.
Yeah, I would say so. I wouldn't even say it was the martial arts, of course. I mean, I think getting beat up all the time just teaches you, stuff. I actually think the hardest thing is when you get into like higher level meditation and you have to like sit for prolonged periods of time. I mean, that is, I think, when you're doing like 3-4 hours, I mean, I know guys probably go for like days and stuff, so that's like nothing to them, but 3-4 hours to me is a real test. For sure. And I think that has built way more mental resilience than the combat experience.
Oh, really? So you've meditated for 3 or 4 hours before?
Yeah.
Wow, that's intense. I can't, I'm not saying it's possible, but I couldn't imagine myself doing it. Is what I'm trying to say.
You just feel like, because I feel like when you meditate like that, like there becomes like nowhere to run. I think in combat scenarios, there becomes a lot of ways to express yourself in a way that masks certain inabilities to cope with how you're dealing with certain things, right? But when you're meditating for 3 to 4 hours, there's nowhere to go. So I think that builds a lot of mental resilience.
Do you know what a sensory deprivation tank is?
Yeah, I've never done one, but I definitely know. Have you ever done one?
Yeah, I've done one.
And how is that?
So I did it once only. I'm way overdue for another one, or for more, not just another one, but making it like more part of my life, right? If anyone were to do it, I recommend you consider doing it for 2 hours for your first time, because a lot of places will be like 1 hour, 90 minutes, or 2 hours, right?
Okay.
My experience, I could be wrong, but my experience, the first 40, 50 minutes, I was still getting used to that. I'm pretty much in a pickle jar, just full of like just salt, and I'm laying on this thing that's like a little oozy,
Okay.
Yeah, and after 50 minutes, I start relaxing and settling in, right? And my mind is finally letting go. And so the concept around a sensory deprivation tank is because our senses are stimulated all the time. There's temperature, there's visible light, there's sound, there's atmosphere on the skin. Yeah. Just stuff that our brain is constantly processing,
Yeah.
So in a sensory deprivation tank, to the best of its ability, like there's no light in there, sound doesn't come in, so there's no sight or sound. The salt solution is heated to pretty much your body temperature. It's not going to be exactly, because like it might be, your body might be like 0.1 degree, 0.2 degree here, right? But to a general level, it's to body temperature. Mm-hmm. And so you're also the tank has something like 1,200 pounds of Epsom salt in it. So it's super potent, right? Super potent for its
wow.
salt properties, but also its relaxation, and then also you're floating inside of this thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
how fascinating.
After 50 minutes, I mentally still knew I was inside a tank, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't hear anything. It was dark, and I started feeling less of my body and just having like no body, because like how do you know where your body ends versus where this table is? Because usually if I touch a table right now, the table is like kind of pulling heat from my hand, so I know that it's there. The table is a different surface, right?
Yeah. But
just floating this thing, after so many minutes, my senses start expanding, and given that it was a completely pitch black inside, my eyes were closed, and at some point I started seeing a bright white light. I'm like, where's this light coming from?
Wow.
Yeah. And so this is about like the 50-minute mark, right?
Okay.
So I had just entered whatever space I was in,
Yeah.
I could only imagine having need to leave right then and there. So the 2 hours was perfect. My only suggestion is maybe bring a towel or something to put under your neck if you have certain discomforts, or your neck is just not used to floating in space for like that long and not having a pillow, right?
Yeah.
Because at some point I felt like my neck was getting strained. I was bringing my mental awareness back to like, oh, you have a neck pain right here,
Yeah.
And so I wasn't fully able to let go, but also that was just my first time too.
Yeah. How long ago did you say this was?
This was a year ago. I like at least maybe even 10 years. It's been a while. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm curious about how you would perceive it, or how people who normally do super long and deep meditations would perceive it,
Yeah. I would be interested in how I perceive it. That sounds very fascinating.
Yeah. Maybe do it, and we'll talk about it for our episode 2.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about mobility.
Okay.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on mobility?
Well, I think one is how people tend to define it. I don't. There seems to be a lot of like floating definitions. I mean, to me, mobility is the accessible flexibility that you have. So you'll have someone, let's say, who can do the splits, and their legs go 180 degrees.
Okay, so you said say that one more time, but also define flexibility and what flexible or you said moving, accessible flexibility, right?
Yeah, accessible flexibility. So, I mean, flexibility is basically how far can you stretch,
okay.
In whatever respective position.
Okay.
Just like strength is how much can you contract or exert in specific positions. Mobility is how much, can you exert with respect to that level of flexibility. So I think an easy example to understand is you have someone who can do the side splits at 180 degrees. Right, but they can only hold their leg up at 90 degrees when they're standing, right? So you have that whole other 90 that isn't mobile, and that first 90 that is. And that's, I think, the most succinct way of defining it, and that's how I would define it. And I think that is probably a good northern star for people to shape their practice around, is mobility versus flexibility and strength. Partly because I think flexibility and strength are contradicting past a certain point. I think it's at one point, they seem like they have some similar interests and overlaps just because of however that movement pattern comes together. But I think mobility inherently embodies both, and so it's just a better way to structure your trainings around.
How would you structure the mobility of the spine or the knees?
Well, in terms of, I'll answer spine first. I think spinal waves have made are much bigger and more prominent now. There's, a famous saying in internal martial arts that you're only as old as your spine is. So
yeah, that's a really good saying. And if social media is any indication, I've seen plenty of video. My phone will probably pick it up now. I'm going to see it. Now I'm talking about it. Plenty of videos of really buff calisthenic dudes doing the wave on the bars, right?
Yeah. I don't know if I would even say that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another extreme version.
Yeah. It's funny because like, I'm sure those guys never imagined themselves doing this, but now that really is like really taking hold. They're like, okay, I'm going to do the wave on the bar.
Yeah. No. So I think I think spinal waves are probably your best for your spine, but I even think that you can get more creative, because spinal waves, what I see typically is like, some low body isolation that we're used to seeing, like with poppers and waving. That kind of is what I would see. But I think you get in a lot more creative ways, and where you more hinge the hips more and wave. I think you could also use different vectors from your shoulders and your hips as a way of finagling your spine a little more. For kids, obviously, bridges and back bends I think is very beneficial. And even what I was teaching about unconventional axes of balance, I think that is a way of exploring the spine, but at a much higher level. So then in terms of knees, I think that you would just want your knee position in relation to your hips and your feet, but explore those different positions. So squatting is obviously, everyone knows what a squat is. Pistol squat has become very common over the years. Two big ones that I think that help out a lot that explore knee strength and mobility in squatting positions are a Cossack squat. You know what a Cossack squat is?
No.
That's when one leg is bent and the other leg is straight.
Okay.
And a shinobi squat, which is like a half a dragon where your foot or sometimes they call them a curtsy squat, where your foot comes on the other side and you kneel.
Okay.
Because I think those strengthen the outside and the inside of the knee versus it just being linear vectors in front.
Yeah. I feel like I have a predisposition to squats just because I'm Asian and it's like a very squat heavy culture, right? Like some of my family members would rather squat and work on cooking than actually sit in a chair. Yeah. I always took it as a thing, and now given with more information coming out about the importance of squat, how it opens up your hips, even your digestion.
I was just gonna say digestion.
And I'm like, it's like I haven't been prepared for this all my life, because I have other acquaintances that I know of that they actually can't squat, like just sit down into a squat, and
for sure.
I never really value or realize the importance of a squat until kind of seeing the difference in mobility, right? Just the ability to sit down in your body, not even anything else.
Yeah, and I think obviously the chair has taken a lot away. People standing all the time has taken a lot away. It's just not a position that's used. Same with like hanging. I mean, there's nothing better for shoulder rehab and just shoulder structure and integrity than to hang. And like we never do that on a daily basis. We don't have any reason to do it on a daily basis, similar to the squat.
Yeah, I really like the way my spine elongates on when I'm hanging. It feels like all this tension just gets released. It almost feels like a drug to me sometimes.
No, it's a phenomenal feeling. Yeah, and again, because you don't really experience it in any time in your life other than when you like deliberately do it.
Tell me about how you approach your body nowadays that you're getting a little bit older versus when you were in your 20s or something.
Yeah, I mean, when I was 20s, I was just dumb. I don't think there was any real intelligence going on. I just practiced. I mean, I would do crazy shit when I was 20. I mean, I remember for a year and a half, I trained for 4 to 6 hours a day with no days off. And it was so stupid. I'm like, what are you doing? But now, similar to what I told you about kind of the 30 minutes, like touching the source and letting it be, that's kind of my whole approach now. It's not as much exertion. Even when I weightlift, it's always higher reps rather than lower reps. So everything is more about frequency more than it is about max effort. I think that's the biggest thing that's changed over the years. Yeah.
Do you do saunas or cold plunges?
Oh, cool. Yeah, I do ice baths all the time. Yeah, that's another good test of if it's truly cold, because I was reading all these articles. I mean, I guess some people only do it down to like 55.
Okay.
Like, and they're like 50. Then they're like, oh, if you do, I've seen that. There's so many different scientific articles about it. But I was reading one the other day. It was like 10 minutes at 55 degrees, which is great because I was much below. I was intense. But huge benefits, huge benefits.
What have you personally noticed, and what brought you into wanting to try it out?
I wanted to try it out just for overall, I think just inflammation in the body, immune response. I thought it would have triggered a higher level of immune response. And those I was both right about. What I didn't know was that putting yourself in the cold plunges spike your norepinephrine levels. And so when you get out of them, and norepinephrine is more around like being driven and vigilant. And so when I get out of a cold plunge, and once I stop shivering, like I'm like ready to go, which I find very, very beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever done the like cold plunge, hot tub back and forth?
No, that sounds a little, no.
So I don't have any data other than my own experience, right? So
Okay.
I'm not recommending this for like just go out and try it. I'm just asking if you tried it, you know?
No, okay.
So take that in mind. I really only done a cold plunge once based on going to Tahoe last year, right?
Okay.
Went to Tahoe, there was it was probably like 10 feet of snow, 50 feet of snow. It was a lot of snow at that time, right? So
Okay.
there was a hot tub outside along with a pool. The pool was pretty much frozen, right?
Yeah.
So I would jump into the hot tub, jump into the pool, jump into the hot tub. The first time I jumped into the pool, I was like, all right, why am I doing this? You know, like my mind was just all figuring all kinds of stories to tell me to get the hell out of there, you know? Yeah. And then it started with 10 seconds. Then it went back to the hot tub, which felt extra hot. But I noticed after that initial time, that feeling started to feel good. I don't know if like my brain was like part masochist. I don't really know what's going on, you know?
You're talking about the cold or the switches felt good?
The cold felt good because of the switches.
Okay.
Yeah. And so when I went to the pool, I started staying down longer and longer and longer.
Yeah.
Jumping back to the hot tub, I actually started to enjoy the experience rather than feel like it was a bad idea, you know.
And how long did you do each for roughly?
The hot tub was because I was hanging out with other people, so it was more casual. It was like, okay, hot tub session, guys. Let me jump into the pool real quick, and then come back and hang out with you. You know.
Yeah.
So the hot tub wasn't really any type of cadence other than whenever I felt like it. Right. The cold plunge or the pool part, whenever I went in there, it was probably I started out maybe 10 seconds, then it got to probably 30 or a minute. You know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Solid. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they say that if you do, I think, almost close to freezing, so like mid to upper 30s, that you only need to do it for 2 minutes.
Okay.
Total. Yeah. Which I didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't had that setup, but I would love to kind of repeat and see if my my findings will match.
Yeah. No, I love ice baths for sure.
Have you ever seen little children do ice baths? So the reason why I asked is over here, ice baths is associated to kind of like the 20s, 30s, especially 30s demographic, where you're optimal. You got your savings, you got a career path. You're trying to figure out, right?
It's a biohacking thing nowadays. Yeah,
yeah, like the Hubermans or the Joe Rogans, right?
For sure.
Yeah, I would never imagine a little kid or a baby cold plunging, or not. Yeah, essentially cold plunging as how we know it in the Western world, right?
Yeah.
But I've seen videos in Mongolia, for example. The whole community is just out in the frozen river taking ice baths, including little kids.
Yeah.
And that just blew my mind because, actually, let me pull up the video. We can watch it together.
Yeah, please do. A lot of, like I've seen a lot of wrestlers from like the Russian regions do that too, because it's obviously so frigid out there.
Yeah, it's really amazing what the body's capable of. Yeah, so I don't know where in Mongolia this is, but I just know it's somewhere in Mongolia. But yeah, here you can see the elders and people like us. I mean, age-wise, and young kids doing it.
That's like a ritual.
Yeah, it's I don't know what ritual it is or what part of their life it is, but it's not just biohacking. It seems like it's part of their culture and part of their life. Yeah.
Oh wow. It's got to take forever to heat back up in that environment.
Yeah, but the fact that little girl is just out here willingly doing it, Yeah, they view this as very essential to not getting sick.
I could see that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that this practice doesn't have science backed by it. What I am saying is they obviously have been doing this way longer than the science has been around.
Oh, for sure.
And so it's amazing that they've have kind of landed on this practice. Look at that little girl. No screams, no like
nothing. Yeah.
It's amazing, right?
That is crazy. Yeah, you watch people cry online when they do it in the Western world. It's funny. It's funny.
Like there's not a peep from anybody that's doing this. I don't know how often they do it, but yeah, when I saw this, it really just made me marvel at really humans and culture.
Yeah, well, especially when it's a part of culture and it's not just like a A biohacking trend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so curious to learn more about like when this practice started in this country, in this culture. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you get huge immune benefits, mega immuno response when you do ice baths. It's great.
What do you feel are some important metrics to take into account for health? Because there seems to be a big emphasis on weight in cardio and blood pressure, right? Which are very important.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's like the only thing that's important, you know?
Yeah.
What do you feel are some metrics that should be considered?
I mean, I'm not enough in that field, I think, to where I can think of specific metrics that I would embrace. I would honestly say, in terms of just overall movement practice, I would say to go away from that. Okay. I think part of the issue with the way that people approach health and fitness currently is that everything is so quantifiable. There's this constant urge to just quantify and record in reps and sets. And I think past a certain point, that does the individual a disservice because it removes so much further from the human component. And I also think that when you get in the highest levels of play and like improvisation, there is no quantifying, right? You can't quantify how good a kickboxer is. I mean, I guess by his record, but I mean, there are certain skills and abilities that you really can't. Like if you look at like Floyd Mayweather's defense, you can't quantify that. So I honestly think it should just go in the opposite. I think people should just start doing things every now and then for the sake of doing them. That's why I think there's been a huge, everyone likes to hike nowadays. That's a big thing. And I think part of it because it's outdoors, but part of it's because you're just doing it to do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm glad you brought up hiking because I challenged and reshaped how I view hiking because I used to be more metric driven, like, oh, let's go on a 5-mile hike and we can do it by this time. We'll be back by this hour, you know? And then at some point it's like, hey guys, let's go. We're almost there, right? And I realized, wait a minute, like what's the point of this hike? You know, like I'm here outdoors and we can just totally enjoy what's happening and take in the moment, right? Whatever the moment means. Maybe we sit in this rock for 2 hours, just chat or go on this tree or play around, do whatever, right? Versus like, hey, like I gotta get my steps in or something like that, you know?
Yeah, well, and I think that it's tied then into so much more spiritual ways when you approach it like that. You can access so many more different emotions when you play, versus when you have the approach of like reps and sets and maxing out. It's like either victory or break. Like it's a very delineated response. Whereas when you play in your movement practice, there's a myriad of emotions which are unquantifiable that you can experience.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did notice that in myself too when I was like really objectifying everything I did in life. Like, let me schedule 30 minutes for this every day or every other day and then do like reps and sets. And whenever I didn't achieve that, even though I did something, my mind would never reward me with like feeling of like, achievement or feeling of like something productive, right? It was more so defeat, like, oh, you didn't do what you set out to do, and therefore you're falling off. You know?
Well, it's hard, I think, too, because I think the benefit of it is it provides, regimen and structure in a way to keep people online, but or I should say in line with whatever their goals are. But past a certain point, I think people wind up defending that practice more than they wind up defending themselves and the reason they're moving. Yeah.
Well said. I really like what you said there. So how could somebody get the Eximo experience?
I mean, the experience itself, is just taught through workshops, if that's the question. Like, where do I teach? Yeah. I mean, predominantly it's just done through private studios in local areas. And the ones that are private studios are open to the public. Anyone can take them. And then at the universities, obviously, they're just at college courses. What I'm aiming to do currently is actually be in a university syllabus. So that would be another way that people can access them. So yeah, I would say those are the 3 ways. Mm-hmm.
Have you considered, or what are your thoughts on having an online curriculum or program?
Yeah, I've been offered online numerous times. The reason I've pushed away from online is because I think online is good when 2 people go into something and there's already somewhat of an understanding of what we're going to do. right? So I think that if someone teaches popping online, I think the benefit is there's already a vocabulary and movements and somewhat of a baseline understanding of what we're getting into. Because not only are the things that I teach, I don't want to say esoteric, but foreign, the movement choices that I also use to embody these principles are different. Like my last one, I did use Cossack squats as one of the primary methods. And so because of that online, I just don't, I don't have enough faith that it would come across in a way where the student feels empowered.
Okay, so you're choosing not to explore it because you don't feel confident that the individuality of the student can be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well put. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then what about like any kind of team? Do you have a team that shares or teaches this method too, or is right now it's just all on you?
Just me. Yeah, team of one. I don't know if I don't even think I've ever had a teaching assistant before. No, that's not true. I've had a teaching assistant before, but for the most part, it's just me. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you thought about forming a team or like a branch, for example? Like let's say someone can go to LA or San Francisco.
Yeah, I have thought about scaling it out that way. I mean, I think that at one point I was going to kind of go, there were really two methods. One, which is more like the Ido method, right? Where you build up a following and you travel, and that's what you see a fair amount of people do. And then you're able to spread the message that way. I mean, my current method, I guess you could say, quote unquote, indoctrination would be to start through universities. And if I can get it into a university full time, the idea would be then the people who are getting their MFAs in dance would then take the course as a prerequisite for getting their degree. And then therefore it would wind up just circulating inevitably that way. And that's my vision for building it on a bigger scale.
Okay, so essentially building the people that are already devoted or established in that path.
Correct.
And giving them the info, and they would naturally make it a part of their own journey and spread.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, awesome. How can people best support you and Eximo?
I think just, taking class or one-on-ones are really the best ways. I won't even say that. I think the best way, and I'll say the best way, if we're talking obviously monetarily, the best way is to private lessons or take a class. I will say what I benefit most from is when people just ask me questions about it and are challenging about it. I taught a workshop. It was the first video we showed. And at the end of that workshop, they wanted me to give one kid an award out of all the workshops I taught. And I gave it to the kid who challenged me the most, In what ways? She would, just ask a bajillion questions. She's like, why is my leg here? What does it do this? If I move it here, is this right? And I really appreciated that because I want a way of testing the integrity of my teachings. So yeah, I'd say the biggest way to support is honestly just ask me about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. In my time teaching dance, I still believe and did believe that the intuitive kid or the open kid is like the best and worst student. The best because
for sure,
because they're so malleable. They're ready to pick up anything out, but they're so keen on what's happening that they'll actually really sharp questions, right?
Yeah,
without any adult filters or adult
absolutely
mind.
Yeah,
and,
no.
and you're like, oh, that's a very deep question.
Yeah, no, that is so true. The intuitive kid is the best and the worst.
Yeah. Any shout outs you'd like to mention?
No, I just appreciate everyone's support up until this moment. I appreciate you having me on here. Obviously, this has been great. Everyone that's shown me support for my journey up until this point and in the future, I appreciate. And yeah.
Yeah. What about any future or legacy goals for either your journey or Eximo? What's the next step or the horizon?
Yeah. Well, when I was just starting out, I did have little goals. I was really supposed to stop at 20 states, and then that just kept going. A huge goal of mine is to teach at Juilliard still. That's still because I've pretty much taught at every major university but there, so that's big. But the biggest legacy thing is to teach at full-time at a university. That I think is the next step because that I think has the best tendency and propensity for growth.
Have you ever taught internationally?
Canada.
Okay.
Yeah, Canada's the stretch of it. Yeah.
You're like, does Canada count?
Yeah, I was like, does it really count? Yeah. Because most people think Europe and stuff, but no, just Canada.
Yeah, I feel like Europe and Asia would love what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll have to make my way out there eventually. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts for our listeners out there? What would you like to close out with?
Just thank you for listening. I think I should be true to yourself, be true to your practice, and be true to you.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Definitely excited to do episode 2 with you sometime and continue the story.
For sure. I'd be happy to do it.